Okay, we're live. Hi, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Hello,
Welcome to
April.
the Tim and April Show.
Here it is. Hello. Good to see you. We are live. Our second ever. And honestly, this is our first full live stream on the new channel. So welcome in, friends. Hello. Good to be with you. I am Tim Whitaker, joined here with April LaJoy. We are the hosts of the Tim and April Show, helping you decode Christian nationalism in the wild. And wow, what a time to be alive, April, because Christian nationalism is all over the place right now, especially in politics. So we really timed this one up.
Yeah, growing up a woman in the church, I was always taught that I need to be Esther for my such a time as this. And I feel like with Christian nationalism just everywhere, I'm like, well, my such a time as this is here. I've been prepared and trained for this moment.
Yes, you really have to be that bold Esther to resist the king of tyranny. Friends, it is good to be with you. Couple quick housekeeping things. First off, if you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe. This is a very new channel powered by the new evangelicals, and we're really trying to launch this thing as widely as we can because we know there are many people out there really with similar stories to April and I, and we're trying to find a better path forward, right, in our faith and trying to understand what's going on and also not be gaslit by the fire hose of propaganda that is being aimed at us 24/7. So please make sure to sub to the channel and like this video, especially if you're watching right now. Likes help YouTube know, more people want to see this. So that would be really awesome. Today will be, I don't know, kind of a unique one-off, honestly, because this is a new show. It's attracting a new audience, and there might be people out there watching or listening to this who are not aware of our stories and how we kind of went from being deeply embedded in Christian spaces that were either Christian nationalist adjacent or just straight up Christian nationalists, and why we ended up leaving and starting, in my case, to work as the new evangelicals, in April, in your case, starting your own social media platform that blew up, and now you're an author, and now you're the co-host of this channel. So I think that's going to be today's kind of major theme. We are working on developing the show. We really plan for this to be a live show. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to plan little bits and segments to kind of help break up the show format, keeping you guys entertained to a degree, but also letting you know that you're not alone in your faith. So we are working on this. So if you have feedback or questions or comments on how we can do a better job, we love to hear it. This is a new format. We've taken what used to be called the recap on the New Evangelicals podcast, and we moved it over to this channel because it became so popular. And April and I both said there's a lot more that we could be covering than just a once-a-week recap. So here we are.
Here we are, yeah. And I do think one angle that we've both talked about too is that we don't want it to be. We'll talk about heavy stuff, but we don't want it to be so heavy because the news already is so heavy that we can bring some sort of humor and levity into it, or a bit of joy, as some may call it. That was almost our name of the show, a bit of joy.
Yeah. Instead, now it's the TNA show.
Are we going to make that joke every time?
I think we have to. I mean, if you were here on the first stream, we brought up the point that, yes, we're aware of the acronym of Tim and April. We're not going to use that acronym anymore at all, but I think it's fun to
except as a joke every single episode.
A little LOL. So,
yeah.
Well, do you want to introduce, I think, a segment, just a small segment that we're really going to try and do as often as possible? I would say every time we go live, it's good to have this. We want to track, Trump made some promises. In fact, I have this audio of him saying,
we're going to bring prices way down.
Okay, yeah, we're going to bring prices way down. And also, there's a narrative in Trump land that Donald J. Trump didn't have to run for president. He was a wealthy man, but he worked so hard. He cares about America so much. He left his throne at Mar-a-Lago to be part of the working man's resistance. So I figured what we would do is we should track the price of eggs, and we should also track how many days golfing Trump goes while in office. So there's actually a website that does this. It's called Trump golf track, and it tells you how many days in office Trump has been in, or how many days Trump has been in the office, and then how many days he spent golfing, and then also the price of eggs. So let me just ask, because a lot of you who are listening to this on podcasts will not know the answer to this. Just take a second and ask yourself, out of 35 days in office, how many days golfing do you think Trump has spent? April, if I didn't show you this number, what would be like your honest guess?
Well, knowing how much he golfed the first time, I don't know. I'd probably say 4 or 5.
Yeah. Okay.
Like maybe, yeah.
Okay. Trump has spent 9 days out of his first 35 days in office golfing, which gives him a percentage of, at this point, 25%. Now, I do anticipate that will go down. I would imagine the longer you're in office, the more it's going to level out. But as of right now, Trump has spent 25% of his time in office, on the taxpayer dollar, by the way, golfing.
Yeah. Wow. What a guy.
Well, could you imagine getting hired at a brand new job, arguably the most important job anywhere in the world, and spending the first 25% of it out there on the golf course?
No, but honestly, there's a piece of me that would rather him golf every day than actually control what's happening. Like I feel like the more he could spend away from breaking stuff.
Right.
I mean, the problem is he's already, nominated and put people in places where they're breaking stuff for him. So that's annoying.
That's correct. Yeah. That's right. Yes. And for those who aren't watching live with us, the price of eggs currently is at about $8, which is about a 40% hike since he took office. So once again,
didn't he say at some point that on day one he was going to lower the prices of eggs?
I think he said this.
We're going to bring prices way down.
There you go. Bring prices way down. They are in fact up.
Yeah.
Way up. And I think, April, what frustrates me, and this is the line that you and I are always trying to walk, right? Because we understand that in any society, things are complicated. I understand that even, as Trump takes office, that things happen beyond any one person's control that can drive prices up or down. I understand that, okay?
Yeah.
But we both know that if Harris was in the office, this would be the talking point all day from the right about how high the price of eggs are. And so I just feel like, to be consistent, we need to lay this at the feet of Trump and MAGA and say, here you go. Your guy promised to lower grocery prices, including eggs, on day one. Egg prices are actually through the roof, and I haven't heard Trump really talk about it. I haven't seen an executive order signed about it, and we are dealing with a huge influx in the cost of eggs at this point, to the point it's to a level where even in my local diner, me and Sarah, I didn't tell you this, April, Sarah and I go to a diner every Friday. It's like our little breakfast routine. And we go to the same space. It's really good. Me and her we each got one meal, and we got a cup of coffee each. How much do you think? She got an egg omelet, and I got like a breakfast skillet. How much money do you think it cost us to eat for 2 people at this Jersey diner? Breakfast
your
food.
Meals were probably like, what, $10 each?
Okay, so you maybe like $25, $30 total?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was $50. They raised prices.
4-star restaurant?
No, it's a Jersey diner. And if anyone knows about Jersey diners, they're not exactly known for being a 4-star restaurant, which is fine. We love that, okay? $50 for Sarah and I to eat breakfast. And they said, yep, prices are really high right now. We had to redo our menu and raise the prices. So I'm just saying, I would love to see some accountability here, but we're not going to see it. Now we're going to see deflection. Oh, it's the bird flu, it's this, it's that, which, by the way, could all be true, but they don't give the other side that same courtesy, right?
True.
I mean, technically, Joe Biden did lower inflation. Like the government lowered inflation throughout Biden's presidency, but prices were still high for a lot of reasons. I get that, right? And it's a fair point to make. But they laid that at Joe Biden's feet every day for over a year. And now the price of eggs are even higher. And they're like, well, guys, it's only been a month. It's only been a month. Come on. It's so frustrating.
It is incredibly frustrating. Well, you know what? Anyway, so that's going to be a regular segment. We're going to check the price of eggs and how many times Trump's golfed just on a regular basis, just to figure that out. But for today, we were going to go way back to the beginning when we were wee little lads.
Oh, wee little lads.
Wee little lads.
In our Awana outfits.
See, I was not Awana. We were Pentecostal. So we did Royal Rangers and Missionettes.
Right. You were really
so
safe.
we've seen a few comments over the last, I don't know, I guess almost a year since we've been doing this, because people either are unfamiliar with me or unfamiliar with you. Background as new people come on. So we're like, towards the beginning of our new show, we are going to just kind of give our background, where we come from, how we landed where we are, the whole shebang. Do you want to start first? What's your background?
Me to go? I don't know. I mean, it's the Tim and April show. Now I'm starting first. I'm going to get roasted in these comments. I can see it now.
Okay, so you want me to go first? Because you don't want to get roasted?
I'm just being silly. April.
Yeah,
I mean, we can kind of start together, I guess. So the background of my story is that I grew up in a very conservative Christian environment. I was homeschooled for 9 years. I went to a church that was kind of like John MacArthur-ish. So, John MacArthur is a Calvinist. He believes in what's called TULIP. It's an acronym that stands for, different beliefs about Calvinism, that you're totally depraved, that God's chosen you before the foundations of the world to be saved or not, et cetera, et cetera. And I grew up in that world. I mean, most of my young adult and early childhood. In fact, the church I went to, April, did not have modern worship. It was a hymns only church. So it was a piano player and hymns. And anything else was seen as demonic and satanic and worldly.
What denomination was that?
Well, this was a non-denominational Baptist church that I went to in New Jersey. But that was totally the vibe that I grew up in. And I that's what you're brought up in. That's what you believe. Because you know this. When you have people telling you how the world works as a child, you just inherently believe them. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. If I tell my 2-year-old, this is a cup or a mug, he doesn't go, is it? He goes, mug. He just takes it at face value. So when you have, older adults telling you that you're totally wicked and depraved and that if you don't pray a prayer and become a Christian, you're going to burn in hell forever, that's just the new objective reality of how the world functions. So I grew up that way for most of my life.
You say you were homeschooled for 9 years.
Yeah.
Did you go to Christian school or public school, the other?
Oh, April. I don't want to brag, but I went to a top tier Christian school and I graduated top 5 in my class.
How many were in your class?
There were 6. I was number 5. So I grew up that way. And when I was 11, so short story, a short version of this is when I turned 11, they got a new pastor. And the pastor was like, yo, let's try some modern day praise choruses. And this was the real basic stuff, like shout to the Lord, I lift your name on high, that kind of stuff, right? And my dad was a rock and roller back in the day, so he brings his guitar out and he goes, hey, we need a drummer, but I don't want to split the church up over drums. What if my 11-year-old kid starts playing? Who's going to get mad at the 11-year-old? That's me. I'm the 11-year-old in this case,
I'm sure plenty of people did.
So my dad buys a drum set, a cheapo drum set. It had the word radical on the bass drum head, so he duct taped it so no one would be offended. And that's how I started playing drums in the church. I mean, I became a professional player after a few years. I grew up playing my entire life. But I was really in that world. And of course, you know this, April, even though we were not Pentecostal, right? We were what were known as cessationists. So speaking in tongues was not biblical. That kind of world was, no offense, but I was taught that people like you were demonic. You were just straight up demonic. You probably worshipped a false god. You did not believe the Bible because, the Bible says women should not be able to preach or teach in church. And Pentecostals, well, they believed in women pastors. And that's a big faux pas. Yeah, big faux pas.
Yeah. Well, if it makes you feel better, we thought Calvinists were stupid.
Well, joke's
just
on you.
Straight up. Predestination? What's the point? Why do we do anything if we're all just predestined and we don't have free will? so dumb.
It's funny being this far removed from everything and hearing from two different people how we grew up in the same culture but on two different sides of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like different sides of the tracks in a town. Like, you're still part of the town, but it's still a very different experience. And it's true. I mean, we would pass the Assemblies of God church every morning, and I just knew, like, well, they're charismaniacs. Like, they're crazy. They don't believe the Bible. Oh yeah. No, for real. I believed all that. And then I got involved with, like, just from there, the funnel is wide. That leads you into the culture of evangelical, like, fundamentalism, right? You can get there from Pentecostalism. You can get there from my John MacArthur cessationist background. And so you kind of discover like this subworld of youth group events and curriculums and books and organizations that are just kind of ready to get you on fire for Christ. And I found them pretty early on. One of the biggest ones was a missions org called Child Evangelism Fellowship. Huge missions organization aimed at kids. And I got involved with them when I was 14 and was part of that org until like maybe like my early 20s or something, where I would teach kids about the gospel. I would lead them through it's called the Wordless Book. Ever heard of that, April?
The Wordless Book?
Yeah. Ever hear about that?
No.
Oh,
Maybe? Sounds
really?
vaguely familiar.
Let's see if I can grab an image.
I don't know. Maybe it was more Baptist.
Well, this was like, so the Wordless Book, it's a book that has obviously no words. It's just colors. And the colors here we go. Perfect. We'll use this one. The colors all represent something. So here it is. This is called the Wordless Book. See how it's green, gold, black, red, white, and gold on the inside. And so each one of these colors represents a different part of the gospel message. Like the gold part represents that God lives in heaven, and then he came down. And then the black page, now called the dark page, which is good, represents sin. And the white page represents God's purity and holiness. And the red page represents, Christ's blood on the cross, etc. So I grew up teaching this to kids. Like I part of what I did was I would teach them this prayer. So I was someone who was really all in. I was all in on the church thing, on the Christian thing, prayed a prayer, and took in the whole world. And then I found the subculture, like the hardcore Christian world of like bands like Emery. And remember, I'm still drumming at this point.
Yeah.
I'm really falling in love with drumming. So I was really sucked in to this vortex in this world of Christian everything. But it was watching what the world was doing, and it was making it Christian and safe to be a part of, but it was kind of sterilized, right? So, okay, you can take all the hardcore Christian, or you can take all the hardcore music, just make it Christian, and it's okay. So you're kind of gutting it of like its rebel like lyrics that the hardcore comes from, but it's Christian now because we're talking about God, so it's okay. That kind of vibe was a huge part of just how I grew up in my teens. I had a mohawk. I would skateboard around town. I had a huge shirt that said abortion is homicide on it. And I would skate around town being like,
yes, you did.
I did. On the back, it had 3 statements. It said, "You will not silence my message. You will not mock my God. You will stop killing my generation." That was what this shirt wore. So I was a part of that for my entire life. And maybe I can stop there and catch you up now. I want to hear your side.
Yeah.
Of your
I just
childhood.
want to, you will not stop killing my generation or whatever. That is silly in and of itself, because probably by the time you're wearing that t-shirt, you're no longer the generation that
What do you mean?
you would be talking about, like abortion wise, like the baby's still coming in.
Right. Right. Yes.
They
Yes.
just logically it doesn't make sense. Yeah. So, hold on. Did you listen to secular music at all?
Not really. No, I was really not. My first ever secular CD I bought was the Yellow Cards Ocean Avenue, and I snuck it into my house. House. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so unlike you, I did speak in tongues. I spoke in tongues when I was 6 because we were Pentecostal. My dad was a Pentecostal preacher. My grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher. So I grew up going to church where my dad and my grandfather co-pastored the church. And it was like a 4,000 member church in Dallas, Texas in the 80s and 90s. And it was really before you had like these giant, large churches existed, but I think the term like mega church wasn't really a thing quite yet, and where you had all these satellite campuses and stuff. So it was a pretty good sized church. My dad and my grandfather were both on like Christian TV and Christian radio. I think my grandfather had like a daily radio program. So I grew
Wow.
up very much like preacher's kid. And
Yeah.
in certain circles, especially like charismatic circles in Texas and like the Midwest, really in America, like there were certain circles where my family was like a well-known name.
Okay.
Where my dad and my grandfather, like it was a big deal in very specific small circles. Not outside of the circles, no one knew who we were. Hold on, I gotta clear my throat.
Okay. I will stall for you.
I'm back.
Cool.
So yeah. So we grew up believing that, name it and claim it. As long as you have enough faith, God will answer your prayer. God performs miracles, that there's nothing too big for God. All things are possible. We thought people who didn't speak in tongues, like we knew people who didn't think you could truly be saved unless you spoke in tongues.
Yeah.
We didn't necessarily believe that, but we did believe that if you did not speak in tongues, you were not experiencing all of God. Like you were just kind of like a lesser Christian.
Would you say that you were like when you were in it, would you call it like the word of faith movement or like the name it and claim it? Like, how did you define what you guys were? Because I was never told like, oh, you're an evangelical Calvinist. You were just taught you're a biblical Christian. That's the phrase.
Right.
That's the phrasing that we use internally. What did you guys call yourselves?
We mainly just called ourselves Pentecostal. Like
Okay.
our church was non-denominational, but my grandfather he was ordained Assemblies of God and then left the Assemblies of God because of the politics. Like we literally had a joke in our household where we said, for all have sinned and fallen short of the Assemblies of God. And having gone to 2 Assemblies of God colleges, I can confirm that they had extra sins. Like they just made up like sin. Like there were just too many rules. It was quite stupid. But yeah, so grew up in that. So I was homeschooled too until middle school when my dad became a pastor. So he was an evangelist who traveled. We would travel in a bus around the country, and my dad would speak in different churches, and then I would sing. We would travel around the world. Me, my 2 brothers, and my mom would sing before my dad would preach. It was like a family affair. We would do all these missions trips. We would raise money to like start orphanages and give out toys and food. And
Wow.
Like it was my entire life. Like my entire identity was the church, Christianity. Like I became a Christian when I was 3, when I said the sinner's prayer. And like from that moment on, I was like, I'm going into ministry. I'm going to follow in my dad's footsteps. I'm going to take over his ministry whenever he retires or passes one day. So it was just like, I was all in as well. It's interesting though, because in high school, I joined my senior year. Our worship band and youth group was actually like a rock worship band.
Oh.
And our worship leader was also the main worship pastor, but he wrote a lot of original songs, and a lot of his worship songs had screamo parts in it. And so
Nice.
I joined the band, and so we had like a screamo worship band that we'd sometimes travel and do worship nights, and it was actually a lot of fun. And I also loved Emory and got into my own little rock phase as well, but I listened to more secular music than you.
I have to give you guys credit though. The Pentecostals, you guys were always cutting edge on the music side. Like what led me to go from my more Calvinist theology to more of a charismatic bent was the youth group band I found down the street that was like, we need a drummer and we're playing all the cool fun stuff. That was my gateway into, they have lights and they're playing Hillsong, all the cutting edge stuff. So props to you on that, because you guys were always ahead of the curve when it came to that stuff.
Did you listen to Carmen growing up?
I listened to Point of Grace, For Him.
I did listen
Twilight
to Point of Grace
Paris,
as well.
Avalon. That was those.
But no Carmen?
I mean, I'm sure I did, but he wasn't like in like my parents' rotation. And then when I kind of got older, I found, this OC Supertones, 5 Hour and Frenzy, DC Talk, right? The more edgy stuff, Emory. It kind of led me down that path long term.
Okay. Well, Carmen was rad back in the day. He was like the gateway drug to, I guess, rhythm for some white people.
No, I get that.
He was
100%.
such a performer. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're not here to talk about Carmen, which he's passed, by the way. And unfortunately, he was a Trumper.
Yeah.
Before he passed, big time. I mean, who wasn't in that world, I guess.
At this point. Right.
Us.
So you were all in. I mean, you believed you were eating up the theology, the beliefs about, name it and claim it, and that, God's on our side, etc. What was it super political for you? Because honestly, looking back on my I don't know, childhood slash like adolescence, it wasn't crazy political. The most political it got for me was like March for Life. You know, we want to see abortion stopped in America, but it wasn't like, oh my God, the Democrats are coming for us. Like there was definitely this talk of like the world and secular and don't send your kids to non-Christian colleges. Like that was in the air I breathed, but it wasn't super political from the pulpit. But was it for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I would say initially, like when I was a child, it wasn't really that political. Like it was more about we are trying to save souls and spread the gospel and, you know, help people was more the goal. But there were definitely political undertones. Like, and my dad, like I was very close with my dad. And so I asked him a lot of questions and he would kind of explain the world to me. And I do remember when I was 10, when Bill Clinton had his scandal. My parents had the news on, and he, you know, when he says, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Right. I remember my dad, I was like, what's happening? You know, I didn't fully understand. And my dad had said, well, he cheated on his wife. Like he tried to like give it, you know, basically he was like, he lied to his wife. And if he would lie to his wife, how much more would he do to the American people? That's right. Bad. So of course he's lying to us. And I remember like drilled into my head was like, he's a Democrat and Democrats are bad because they're not holding him accountable, where Republicans are Christians and they're good and they are trying to hold him accountable and want to impeach him because morals matter and character matters in a president. And that was drilled in my head from a kid.
Okay, you just unlocked something. You unlocked a core memory inside of me, actually. But before we do that, let me just say, if you're watching this stream for the first time, if you just hopped in, welcome. Please make sure to give this video a like and sub to the channel. We do this every Monday, every Thursday. Today is a unique episode because we're sharing our stories of kind of what got us to this point. Someone asked, how did you and I meet, April? We will answer that in a few minutes. We will get there, I promise. So the memory that this unlocked for me was that I look back now and think about exactly what you said. First off, I grew up on talk radio. So I listened to Rush Limbaugh consistently, Sean Hannity consistently. I remember that thing with Bill Clinton and my dad and my parents being like, oh my God, I can't believe that he did this, which by the way, to their point, they're right. I mean, you could even argue it was sexual assault, right? Like Monica Lewinsky was like in her early 20s. How can you consent when the world's most powerful man, you know, does that, right? So I'm not excusing that at all. I agree. I would never vote for Bill Clinton, you know, if he was ever running for president again or something. And also, I remember in my church, if someone got divorced or if like someone's marriage was like on the fritz, it was a death sentence to that person. Like they got judged hard because you don't divorce, you don't cheat on your spouse, like you stick through that marriage at all costs. So even though it's funny, we grew up again in different spaces in this evangelical world, there were definitely some through lines, and sexual immorality, aka divorce or cheating on your wife, or God forbid a girl gets pregnant out of wedlock at the church, which happened several times. Oh my goodness, like the end of the world, right? Because sex is sacred and we don't want to violate that. So I grew up in a very similar position that you did as well, 100%.
Well, and also the 90s and like 2000s were peak purity culture world. Yep. And I grew up like I came of age at the height of purity culture. And it's interesting because I was a pastor's daughter, I was kind of in the room or at the dinner table when we'd go out to eat after church, hearing what the adults were saying. So it was less of what was directly taught to me and more of just like what I picked up being a kid in that world. And like, I remember too, like ingrained from that same story were people blaming Hillary for what Bill Clinton did, where there was like, well, if she never put out, like I was able to piece things together as a kid, where it was like, oh, the wife has to satisfy her husband all the time because that's a need and that's what the wife is supposed to do. And like I grew up and my dad too. I mean, I was very close to my dad, and I think if he were still alive now and we had this talk, I think he'd feel bad about this. But he would brag about my virginity from the pulpit, like probably starting from when I was like 13, because and at the time I was like proud of it because I was vowing to do that. Yeah. But like in hindsight, I was like, why are we talking? Like, why? I was a kid. That's
You weren't a
weird.
kid.
But it was totally normal in that
Yes.
world. Where
Yes.
and everyone else would come up to me like, we're so proud of you, which is interesting because like my brothers were making the same vow, but no one ever like made over them for making that vow. It was like, oh, April, so great. Like you're going to inspire so many young women to stay pure and blah, 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 blah. And like how many purity pledge cards I signed. And I had a purity ring for that I asked for. I mean, to be fair, like I bought it like hook, line, and sinker. Like I was in and like in my head, I remember like we would play these games of like, oh my gosh, what if you got pregnant? Which I couldn't have got pregnant because I wasn't having sex. But literally in my head, I thought like, oh my gosh, if I ever did for however that would happen, I think I would secretly go have an abortion and just live with the shame of knowing I murdered my baby because I knew that's what it was, than have to ever admit that I had sex before marriage. Because I really felt like if I ever, like my dad, this is how I felt based on growing up in that world. But I felt like my dad would rather hear me confess that I had killed someone than confess that I had had sex before marriage.
Right. That's how much pressure, right, is in that space. Because you're right. And it was different on the guy's side of that. It was different. It wasn't the same thing, but it was still a lot of pressure. The pressure was you're going to become a sex monster and you have to hold it in metaphorically and literally until you get married. And when you do, you will be so satisfied. Like we were just taught that we're just waiting for the sex buffet when we get married to someone, right? And like it was our job as men to war against the flesh and to fight the battle internally and to like never acknowledge that like feelings that you have are normal or just typical biological teenager stuff, right? So in my head every day, it was like a war against like whatever I thought lust was. If I saw a body part for too long, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Or like, whatever it was like a consistent shame game of like, my body is inherently like problematic because I have these desires. And the only way to fix them is if I war against them all the time. I literally created in my head, in Lord of the Rings, like that cave troll in the first one, right? I literally envisioned lust as that cave troll. And it was my job to defeat the cave troll every time I was tempted. And if I defeated it, I was doing the manly thing. And if I fell into it, then the thing beat me and I beat myself up for it. In fact, this created such an anxiety complex inside of me because I'm the Enneagram, I'm a type 6. So I'm already kind of predispositioned towards anxiety. But I was so worked up that when I was 17, I had my first kiss with my girlfriend. And I was so worked up, no lie, I threw up afterwards. Like I had to like turn the other way. I threw up into the bushes because I was so anxious that like I went too far or that like something bad's going to happen or that this is wrong or inappropriate. So it's interesting because yes, I signed the purity pledges as well. And I did all of that stuff. And for me, I wasn't paraded around as like, the virtue of purity. That wasn't what I had to deal with. I was dealing with the fact that anything I thought about was automatically like totally depraved and horrible. And how could you think about this stuff and war against your flesh 24/7, 365? Like that was what I was taught to do. And I was promised that once I get married, all of that will just go away. Because I'll be able to have sex whenever I want. And I'll always be in the mood to have sex whenever I want. And my partner will be a willing participant whenever I want. And I'll have no more problems. It will just solve it for me. So that was the sex talk I was given.
Oh, yeah. I mean, similar. I didn't have the exact same metaphor in my mind. But basically, in your metaphor, I would have viewed myself as the cave troll. As like the constant temptation for men. That I had to like try to not be that. Like I remember being in Texas and wearing sweaters over my summer dresses so that my shoulders weren't like basically having a heat stroke before I caused a man to lust after me. And also just like all these people today, like conservatives who talk about how, the left sexualizes children or drag shows sexualize children, which is like, it's just such projection because I remember being a child, and this didn't come from my parents, but just from Sunday school, from kids church, from youth group that were telling little girls, you need to cover up your shoulders and dress modestly, or men
Yeah.
will lust after you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was adult looking back where I realized how problematic that was, that the church actually sexualized little girls because men can't control themselves, but they put that burden on the women and literally children.
Yeah. Yeah. This is going to be a huge theme. The reason why we're kind of parking here is because it plays a big role in what led us to go, wait, something doesn't make sense. Before we continue, because I think it's time to get kind of to like the turn of when we started realizing maybe it's not correct. Let's take a short break. We'll come back and we'll get into it. Hang tight. The Tim and April Show is a part of the New Evangelicals Network. Is it just me, or do you ever feel like the version of Christianity you were handed just isn't it? Yeah, me too. And that's why I started the New Evangelicals. We're a nonprofit, digital-first organization dedicated to helping people deconstruct toxic theology and helping you embrace a faith rooted in love, justice, and of course, inclusivity. We talk about the hard stuff, Christian nationalism, purity culture, church trauma, and the Bible, without the gaslighting, fear-mongering, and other baggage that we know comes along with it. We build real community, challenge harmful narratives, and remind people that following Jesus was never about power or control. It was about love, justice, and liberation. So if you've got questions, if you're feeling alone in your faith journey, or if you just need a place where it's safe to ask, what the happened to American Christianity, we're here for you. You can follow the New Evangelicals on podcast, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram to be part of the movement, because faith should be about loving your neighbor, not legislating your theology.
Hey y'all, it's April LaJoy here. When I talk about Christian nationalism, I am unfortunately speaking from firsthand experience because I used to be a Christian nationalist. In fact, I sang my own original Christian nationalist song on the Jim Bakker Show.
America say Jesus, he makes the nation free. Jesus can never be.
That's enough of that. But if you want to hear more about my story, where I talk about what it's like to be a Christian nationalist and peel back the curtain of what that mindset feels like, you can read all about it in my book, Star Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith. I also talk about the different tenets and tactics and the frontline issues of Christian nationalism that keep people inside. So it's available wherever books are sold. It's also available in ebook and audiobook versions, and I narrate it.
Hey friends, I know how worried you are about how empowered Christian nationalism got in this past election and how it's being used to distort faith and threaten democracy. The good news is that people are mobilizing to resist, which is why I'll be at the Summit for Religious Freedom happening April 5th through the 7th in Washington, D.C. Christian nationalism is not just a political issue. It's a direct challenge to religious freedom for everyone. That's why it's so important that we come together, learn from experts, and organize for real change. At this summit, you'll hear from powerful speakers, connect with like-minded advocates, and be a part of a movement to push back against the misuse of religion in politics. And also, I'll be there. And because you're watching a New Evangelicals production, you get 10% off of your ticket with the code TNE25 at checkout. This fight is too big to take on alone. Join me in Washington, D.C. April 5th through 7th and use code TNE25 for 10% off. Let's do this together. Link in the description. I know how lonely this journey can feel when you're questioning, deconstructing, or just trying to find a faith that actually looks like Jesus. That's why I'm proud to announce TNE Connect is coming in March. This brand new app from the New Evangelicals is designed to help you find community, connect with like-minded people, and access exclusive resources, all paywall free, of course. With TNE Connect, you can join local and online groups, dive into deep conversations, and get resources that help you find a better path forward in your faith without an algorithm deciding what you see and don't see. No gatekeeping, no pay to play, just a space for you to belong. So whether you're looking for community, support, or just a place where asking hard questions is normal, this is for you. TNE Connect is launching in March. If you want to be the first to know when it's available, hit the link in the description to get notified. All right, we're
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Welcome back. If you're just joining the stream or maybe you're listening to this later on, please make sure to give this video a like. Welcome back to the Tim and April Show and subscribe to the channel. So we're sharing our story of kind of how we went from growing up in this world of evangelical Christianity that led us on the path to Christian nationalism. And then when we decided to take a detour and say, actually, something is way wrong. So one piece of my puzzle, April, that I want to kind of fill in here, and then we'll kind of get to what caused us both to go, something isn't right. I took a long-term, I guess maybe midterm, short mission trip overseas. I was in Germany, Finland, and Belgium for a month in each country. And one of the things that we did in Belgium was we worked with a church that met in small groups around the city of Brussels. And I will say, in the beginning, I was really sus because I was still pretty conservative. I was still pretty Calvinist. And this church met in bars. Bars around the city of Brussels. And I told my buddy who I was with, I said, dude, like, there's alcohol in bars. Like, I don't think, this doesn't feel very biblical to me. You know, this doesn't feel like a biblical church model. But I had to go. I mean, I'm not going back home, right? So I went, and one of the people that we stayed with, they gave me a book called Pagan Christianity by Frank Viola. And honestly, this book is still very impactful to me today. Frank's thesis is that most of our like church systems and structures and rituals come from pagan culture, like a stage and an audience. That's a pagan thing, not a New Testament thing. Or a paid clergy member is a pagan thing, not a New Testament thing. So keep in mind too, and I'm sure you felt maybe the same way, I was very much radicalized, right? To be like this all-in Jesus person. I wanted the true faith. I wanted the true gospel. I wanted to be super biblical. And so when I got this book, I was like, wait, what? Like, most of like the mega church structures that I've been a part of are like pagan in nature. It really set me on this course of being very critical of my own faith tradition. Now, this was way before TNE or before Trump came on the scene, but there was a part of me that was kind of, maybe we can say like the seeds were planted, right? Because I was starting to have a few questions. I was like, well, did God really predestine everyone before the foundations of the earth to either go to heaven or burn in hell forever? And they have like no choice but to pick one. And also, because I was drumming in a more charismatic space, and I'm realizing that they interpret the Bible differently, I was starting to be like, well, wait a second. I thought the Bible was super clear. I thought that like these verses only had one interpretation to them. So there were like little cracks in my foundation that were forming. I'll never forget Rob Bell. I'm sure you remember Rob Bell. He wrote all these different books, right? Yeah. And one of them was called Love Wins. And in one chapter of that book, he just questioned if maybe God's love reaches people, even those who are in hell. And there was a huge backlash from evangelicalism, right? I mean, John Piper's tweeting at him, Francis Chan, and at the time, Preston Sprinkle, they write a book trying to answer this. And so I started realizing, like, well, I was getting curious, and I wanted to know, is this the only way to view these things? At that time, I was still very much in the basement of Christianity. So all resources were pointing me back towards the answers that evangelical fundamentalism gave me, but I was starting to realize that there were some cracks in the foundation, and theologically for sure, but also I started realizing that the church is really aimed at the culture and judging culture, including gay people. Now, to be clear, I grew up and was not affirming for most of my life. That changed more recently out of the grand scheme of things. But I started realizing, like, wait a second. You know, in 1 Corinthians 5, the Apostle Paul tells the church, don't judge those outside the world. Don't judge those in the world. Judge those inside of the church. And he says, what business is it of mine to judge those who are quote unquote sexually immoral outside the church? That's not your job. So even back then, as a conservative Christian, I started realizing, like, wait, why are we always talking about the threat of gay people? Why are we always talking about people outside the church when the responsibility from Christians was to hold those inside the church accountable? So even way back then, there were certain cracks in the dam, so to speak, that were starting to form. And that was the beginning of me wondering if the steps that I saw in that basement led somewhere other than what I was told, which was a desert wasteland of atheism and secularism.
How old were you when that happened?
like I would say like 18 through like 22, because I was also part of a really beautiful young adult group called 11th Hour. It was not part of a church. We formed it ourselves. We were a bunch of radicals who just wanted to love each other as best as possible and explore theology. So we were very committed to this, and it was, to this day, one of the most formative experiences of my life when it came to community and loving people well. So I was kind of in a unique space where I was with these people who were thinking about these things as the same way I was, but were also very much committed to, the authority of the Bible and to taking the gospel seriously. But we started realizing these cracks maybe in like my early young adult years into like my mid-20s.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of a common theme, like when people start to deconstruct, is that it happens for a lot of us very slowly over years. It's not it's usually not like an overnight thing, which was the case for me as well. And I think, because there is a lot of cognitive dissonance within this ideology already, there's always little things that happen along the way that you are taught to just kind of dismiss. Well, this doesn't make sense, but I'm not supposed to doubt it, so I'm just not going to think about it. There's like some disassociation going on. So there were a lot of little things like that happened for me too. I definitely, after 9/11, we got way more political. And also a lot of overseas churches stopped having meetings as much and stopped having what we called crusades. Which is weird.
You called them crusades?
Like Billy Graham crusades.
Oh, no, you're right. You're right.
They were called crusades when you would go and rent out a stadium in another country and do worship services. That's what they're called. I have
never put that together, but you're totally right. Oh my goodness.
I know. It's wild.
It was right there.
But after 9/11, they stopped happening as often. And so then we started focusing more on America. And my dad wrote a book in the early 2000s called America Say Jesus. On the front cover, he had a prophetic warning that said, unless America defines her God, which is Jesus Christ, that God will lift the veil of protection on our nation and America will experience bloodshed like never before. And that was kind of in response to George W. having Muslims pray sometime and kind of trying to, where George Bush did a lot wrong, but he was trying to include, more interfaith stuff, which really pissed off
ecumenical.
Yeah, which really pissed off a lot of the conservative Christians around me, including myself. And so we believed that America was founded as a Christian nation, and that God had supernaturally blessed America through all of our wars and through everything that we ever did. And I was also taught a very whitewashed version of American history, that what we did to indigenous people was actually really good because they had Jesus now. And, like Christopher Columbus was a good Christian missionary. Very twisted ways of thinking. But it's how I grew up. So it was just what I knew. Also homeschooled for a time.
I was taught that too. Yep.
Yeah. And so when I was in high school, we did an America Say Jesus caravan for a couple months in a 40-foot bus that had America Say Jesus written all over it. And we drove it from South Florida all the way to California, up and down the Las Vegas Strip, stopped in Branson to be on the Jim Bakker show, went up to DC. It was a whole thing. And if you saw the ad earlier, that was me singing my own original song that I also wrote to go along with my dad's book called America Say Jesus. So I was all in. And we believed that things like abortion and gay marriage and all of these things that we considered sin were leading to things like Hurricane Katrina or 9/11 or things like, and we were never ones that said it out loud, but we kind of believed that the reason bad things were happening to America was because America was not as Christian and we had gone down this moral decline. And the only way to get back in God's really good graces was to elect Christians, AKA Republicans. So in high school, I made a MySpace group called I'm a Christian, therefore I'm a Republican. I got very into politics. I joined debate class, debate club. Like I debated people on the Republican side, but very Christian nationalist. But the funny thing is I would have never called myself a Christian nationalist.
Right.
I thought I was just being a good Christian, standing up for biblical values, willing to die for my faith. And because Christians in America were persecuted. Like I fully believed that Christians were persecuted despite having never been persecuted.
Well, April, before you go forward, why don't I do this? Why don't I give you the 5 statements that PRRI uses to measure how much someone believes in Christian nationalism. That will also give people some kind of framework for this. And let's see how much young April would agree with this.
Okay.
All right, let's see how
down.
Christian nationalists you were. Point 1, the U.S. government should declare America as a Christian nation. Do you completely disagree, mostly disagree, NA, not applicable, mostly agree, or completely agree with that? Past April.
Past April would have said Christianity should definitely be our nation's main religion, just like English should be our main language. But I would have said other religions could be allowed.
Okay, so we'll go like,
but not the official.
Right, like 90% agree. We can declare America a Christian nation, but allow other people to worship how they see fit.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, U.S. laws should be based on Christian values.
Correct. I would have said absolutely.
Completely agree. All right.
I believe there is like no morality outside of God. Like you could not be good outside of Christianity.
Oh, well, of course. I mean, that's why you had the evangelical apologetics industry, right? You had Ravi Zacharias and all these people trying to tell you how the Christian God that they worship is the only way you can get real morality, for sure. Okay. Point 3, if the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore.
Yes.
America say
Believed
Jesus,
that.
baby.
100%.
Okay, completely agree. Point 4, being Christian is an important part of being truly American.
Yeah, I would have said yes.
God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society.
Yeah.
All right, well, congratulations.
I would agree with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you would have been
I was a Christian nationalist.
Yeah,
yes.
you were a Christian nationalist, 100%. And I think for me, I would be probably past Tim would probably be somewhere along the like I mostly agree, but with some caveats to some of this stuff. Like I don't know if me at 21 would have been like, God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. But what I would have said is that living, God's way or living the way of Jesus is the best way to live life. So it should be prioritized in American society because it's the best way to live. So I would have gotten there through like a different kind of set of messaging.
Right. And I don't think I would have phrased it that way either. Like you were still a little bit politically correct back then,
Yes.
like when we would talk about it. And I would say like, I would never force somebody to become a Christian or do anything. But did I believe Christians were the best candidates to be in charge of everything?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So you were a Christian nationalist then. Congratulations.
Yes. No, I know. That's why I wrote a book about it.
I just wanted people to know that you have the street cred, because April, you know this, right? What's the big critique of those who deconstructed? You were never real Christians to begin with. You just wanted attention from the world. You never believed what you actually used to say you believed. No, like April and I were all in on this stuff 24/7, 365. We read the books. We were preaching the messages. I mean, one piece I'll just add on to this, April, to kind of get in there with you. I remember when CEF, Child Evangelism Fellowship, they went to the Supreme Court to get the right to teach the Good News Clubs in public schools. And they wanted us to pray that God would open up the door for them to bring the gospel to boys and girls in public schools. And I did. And I taught that stuff in my local public school after school ended. So yes, I absolutely prayed and believed that we have to be a force for good, and we have to be a Christian nation because that's the best way to live. I will say I didn't know exactly what that meant, and the more I went down the path, the more that definition for me really diverted from where things ended up.
Yeah. Do you want me to start saying what? I guess the first thing that made me change was actually had nothing to do with politics, really, because when you are a Christian nationalist, whether you know it or not, your political ideology and your theology are like very intertwined. They're basically one and the same. So once you start doubting one, they both become vulnerable, and it doesn't matter which one it is. Like you pull the string. Even if it's a political ideology, the other's going to go. If it's theology, the other's going to go. So for me, the first thing was actually theology. And I started questioning my Pentecostal beliefs first because in 2011, I was 23, my dad he was only 57, was diagnosed with stage 4 non-smokers lung cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months to live. So obviously the Pentecostals in us and then like all over the world like came together. We're like, we're gonna lay hands. Like he was in and out of hospital for months, and everyone, there was always a new Pentecostal showing up because they wanted to get the glory of the big healing prayer. But I just believed, I had no doubts that God was going to heal my dad, because that's what I had been taught. And I had seen what I had believed were miracles before. So it was like, of course, God's going to do this miracle for my dad. He's given his whole life for God in this ministry.
Right.
But 4 months from the diagnosis, he passed 4 months later. And that absolutely wrecked me, because my dad was also kind of the voice of God in a way for me. Like I just took whatever he said as like, he heard this from God.
Right.
And I was very close to him. So not only did I kind of lose my spiritual leader, but I lost my dad. And now I'm also dealing with this realization that God does not always answer your prayer.
Yeah.
Even if you have enough faith. And in the aftermath of my dad's passing, I became very frustrated with a lot of Christians, because I was absolutely destroyed. Like my entire world stopped. And a lot of Christians in our life could not accept the fact that God just didn't answer our prayer. So they would say things like, well, God probably just didn't answer your prayer because you have some sort of unresolved sin in your family, or because your dad was living outside of God's will and he should have stayed an evangelist instead of becoming a pastor. Or, well, God did answer your prayer and gave him his ultimate healing in heaven. And for whatever reason, that one actually pissed me off the most, because like, God knows that is not what I meant when I prayed for it. And there was this kind of toxic positivity in the church that could not handle me being sad. And we're like, why are you shouldn't be sad. Your dad's in heaven. You'll get to see him again. Don't be sad. Like it's like, how is that going to help your witness to other people if they see you sad when you can be, it was just a lot. And I remember just being so angry with a lot of Christians around me at that time, that I just kind of went inward and it was the first time I actually allowed myself to question things. And then also in hindsight, I realized how messed up it was when I had said similar things to other people when they were going through stuff like that, because I also didn't know how to handle God not answering prayer. So that was really the first big thing for me, was actually a theology thing, but that kind of left me open to realizing I could be wrong on other things.
I had my initial major cracks I remember happening were both political and theological. The first political moment I had was I grew up in construction, and we were on the job site, and Rush Limbaugh was on. This was like maybe 2 years into Obama's second term, and Rush was doing what Rush does. Obama's destroying America. He hates the country. And I remember thinking, wait, but Obama's been president for like 6 years now, and we're all still here. Like the country's still working. And I thought to myself, like, am I missing something? Like he can't possibly be as bad as they're telling me, because if he was, the country would be destroyed. Like I was just using my logical faculties, as undeveloped as they were, while I'm sitting there rolling a wall like this going, wait, Rush, like, it's been 6 years and like we're all still here. Like we're still functioning. So that was kind of the first crack. And I was always someone, I'm not sure about you, April. I was always a curious person. I was always wondering, how do other people see what to me is so clearly the wrong side of this issue? Like, there has to be something I'm missing. So that was kind of the first crack. And the second one was also theology, right? Growing up, and I was kind of like a mutt of evangelicalism, because the friends that I had were also Pentecostal. Like I discovered Misty Edwards and speaking in tongues and laying hands on people, like my friends, prophesying over them. But we also took the Bible very seriously. I mean, we discovered Paul Washer, for those of you who know who he is, very reformed, fire and brimstone preacher, and we're listening to him in the car. We're like, wow, yeah, like the true gospel. We want that, right? So I was still like wrestling through this Calvinist belief set I was given of God predestining. And my brother, who's not a Christian, one day he just told me, I guess God predestined me to burn in hell forever. And I was like, I don't know if I can deal with that. I don't know if I can accept that. And then of course the other of course, we all know that pastors have primed your brain to answer that question, right? Who are you, oh God, to talk? Who are you, oh man,
Yeah.
to talk back to God?
Yes.
Right? Like you can't ask that question. But I couldn't stomach the thought of my brother burning in hell forever while I was in heaven, only because God predestined it to be so. Those were kind of like two of the moments that I remember big time that really got me thinking, on top of, and again, to be very clear, I was not affirming. Okay, I believe that being gay was sinful, but I noticed how there seemed to be a real emphasis on the LGBTQ plus community. I even had a really bad blog, a super amateur level, terrible blog. And I would talk about how, look, the Bible calls out greed all the time. Why aren't we talking about the greedy? Like, why aren't we consistent with how we talk about sin? Those things for me really punched in some of the cracks in the foundation. So I had like some small leaks. But it was definitely in 2015, 2016, where for me, those cracks got really freaking fractured. So are you cool if I kind of share my experience and we'll get yours?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Before I do, friends, welcome into the stream. This is the Tim and April Show. We are just sharing kind of our story. How did we get from growing up super conservative Christian to doing this show, and what went into that? So if you're watching the stream, thank you. Please make sure to give this video a like. It is so easy to do, and it helps get this video out to more people. And please make sure to sub to the channel, because we are focused, laser focused on this channel and on growing it, being here twice a week live with you all. So thank you so much. So, okay, so here's what happened, right? At this point, I'm fully in the church thing. I'm drumming all the time. I'm taking my faith very seriously. I'm inhaling all of the books that Christian evangelicalism will give you, right? I'm reading Brian McLaren. I'm also reading Shane Claiborne, and I'm reading John Piper. Like, it all works in my head somehow. It's another election cycle. I'm kind of tuned in now more to the political world than I ever have been before. And, this guy Trump comes on the scene. And in the beginning, during the primaries, during the primaries, like I remember vividly the talk radio people I listened to, like Mark Levin, for example, absolutely hated Trump. He's a grifter. He's a con artist. He doesn't like you. He doesn't want you. He's a bully. These are conservative commentators saying this, right? No one in my church really liked him, as far as I could tell. There was just this vibe of like, oh, no one's going to take this dude seriously, right? And at the time, I liked John Kasich. I'm like, I like John. He seems kind of, I would say at this point,
That's who I liked too.
Okay, right. So you get me, right? I mean, at this point, I'm more of a moderate, probably. Like I'm definitely pro-life. I'm definitely anti-gay. But I realize that in a secular society, my gay neighbors have the right to get married, right? So I was more moderate on these things. But I was still definitely conservative. Trump comes on the scene, and he starts like getting popular. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. And then I start hearing like pastors and church people that raised me talk about Trump and kind of express their support. And I'm like, this feels really weird. And then he gets the nomination, right? And I'm like, okay, this is bizarre. Like, what's happening? This guy is a bully. He's really nasty. Again, I'm thinking about the things as a child. I couldn't even say crap. I couldn't say shoot. It was too close to other words, right? I had to have a very clean mouth, and bullying was not okay in the spaces I grew up in. Like, I was taught to be a very nice person. Like, integrity was a big piece of the puzzle that I was taught to fill in as a child and young adult, right? I had to be a man of integrity, sexually, ethically, etc. And then, like, this is the moment that I will just never forget. Like, I think this will be a lifelong watershed moment, right? Trump gets the nominee, or he's running for president. I'm like, this is crazy. And then the infamous Hollywood Access tape comes out, right?
Yes.
Trump comes on, and it turns out on a hot mic, he talks about and is bragging about grabbing women, making out with them, and grabbing them by the you-know-what.
Yep.
And I hear the audio, and my jaw drops, right? And now at this point, what is this, 2015? Right?
Yes.
I think I was married then. Yeah, I think I was married then. I was going to be married. And like, I'm just thinking about, me and my partner, we saved ourselves for marriage. Like, we did everything correctly, and I'm like, oh, this guy is a total sexual abuser. Like, and again, I was still in church, still very conservative, but I was like, oh, this is a no-brainer. And I thought to myself, there's no way there's no way Christians, meaning evangelicals, are going to go for this guy after this. Like, this is going to be the nail in the coffin, because we know, April, how we grew up. Like, these are humongo no-nos. Not to mention he was on his third marriage on the cover of Playboy. I'm like, this is it. Like, this guy's toast. And then I started hearing the rhetoric. We need a commander-in-chief, not a pastor-in-chief. That's just locker room talk. And when I tell you my flabbers were gasted, I could not believe what I was hearing. I truly could not believe what I was hearing as a man who grew up in this world, who couldn't even serve as a volunteer drummer on the worship team if I was with my girlfriend for too long alone, even if we did nothing wrong, because we had to, quote, abstain from any appearance of evil, right? And God couldn't use someone who was sexually immoral. There's no way I could serve in church if I was sexually immoral, meaning having, in theory, consensual sex with my girlfriend. Forget the abuse part. Just consensually engaging in sex with my girlfriend kicked me off of any kind of church platform. This man's bragging about grabbing women by the genitals and laughing about it. And they're telling me, hey, dude, we need a commander-in-chief, not a pastor-in-chief. I had an amateur podcast. Me and some friends were podcasting, and like that was the first sledgehammer blow to that dam, right? I mean, it was like, now we have a problem. Now I'm getting real curious. Like, okay, what is happening to my tradition? What is happening to the people who raised me this way, who are now telling me that if I don't vote for this guy, I'm not doing the will of God? That was the first major crack for me.
So I had a major crack around that same time too. Obviously, everything you just said about Trump broke the dam. But before that, actually, like in early 2015, so this is like one of those stories that honestly keeps me believing in God and like having faith, because it's like one of those things that I can't explain this story, but I'm going to share it because it's a big piece of this. I have a dream. Twice in my life, I've had a dream where exactly what I dreamed happened later. So this was the second time. And I had a dream, I guess, spoiler alert, but I had a dream that I was sitting at my kitchen table where I lived in Virginia at the time, and that one of my brothers flew out and was sitting at the other end of the table. We were like on the two heads of this long table, and he came out to me as gay and was bawling and said, you know, that he had always been gay since middle school, and was crying. And it was so real. It was like one of those dreams that, you know how usually dreams, like, you know, you're in a room, but the room doesn't look like the room. This dream, the room was exact. Like it looked like real life. I remember waking up, and I was married at the time. And I told Beecher the dream. I was like, oh my gosh, I had this dream that Andrew came out to me as gay. And Beecher's like, well, do you think he is? And I was like, I have no idea. Like, we grew up in a very homophobic household. I mean, that whole environment in the church in the 90s and 2000s was super homophobic already. It was just an essential part of being an evangelical. And so I remember, like, it kind of gave me some time, you know, but also, like, I couldn't just call up my brother and be like, hey, are you gay? Because if he wasn't gay in that world, thinking someone was gay was an insult. Totally. You know, like, so I wasn't just going to ask him, because I was like, well, I don't want to put it in his head, because we didn't understand how being gay or being queer worked. Like, I was like, I don't want to put it in his head and then becomes gay, which is so wild to think about now. But I slowly started thinking, like, okay, well, if he is gay, I need to prepare myself for this. So I kind of got to the point, I looked into like side B theology a little bit, and I was like, okay, so I had become somewhat friends with gay Christians, but they were struggling, you know, like they weren't identifying as gay, but they, you know, quote unquote, struggled with same-sex attraction. Right. And so
they were warring against their flesh.
Correct. Where previously, like, I had grown up, like, if you had those desires at all, you couldn't be a Christian, and that God had to completely deliver you from that. Otherwise, you were given over to a reprobate mind and you were an abomination, and that a demon was always involved with someone having same-sex desires was what I was taught. And that it was a choice. Someone was never born that way. Totally. So 6 months later, my brother comes out to visit us. And I like intentionally kind of was hinting that I wanted, if he was that way, I wanted him to feel safe to come out to me. So I was just like, I think you could be a gay, you could be struggle with homosexuality and be a Christian. And he was like, yeah, I think so too. And I'm like, like, what do you think about that? But
Any thoughts?
But even still, like, even though I was hinting at it in my head, I was like, there's no way he's gay. Like, I've said so many homophobic things. Like, he said it too. Like, we grew up in the same world. Like, there's just no way. This is my brother, and he was a Christian. Like, he believed all the same things I believed. And so we got back to our house. It was just me and him. He sat in the spot where he was in my dream. I was on the opposite end. And he says, April, I need to tell you something. And then just starts bawling. Like, I've never seen him cry this hard in my life. And just said he's never been attracted to the opposite sex. Since middle school, been attracted to the same sex. Spent night after night since then begging God to make him straight. And it's just like bawling. And my heart absolutely broke in that moment. And I just walked over to the other side of the table and I just hugged him. I was like, it's okay. I love you. And I immediately knew, I didn't know what was right. I didn't know what I believed theologically necessarily.
Yeah.
But I knew I was wrong. And in that moment, I was like, I have to choose my brother over this book, because it played in my head. Like, I have said so many awful things about people who struggle with same-sex attraction. And it was my brother the whole time. And it was just kind of this wake-up call of something's not right. I've been taught something wrong. And I immediately was like, okay, I don't know what I believe theologically,
Right.
but I'm not going to fight this politically anymore. Like, there's just too many things that I don't know. And that was in 2015. So simultaneously, Donald Trump's also coming onto the scene. And ironically, I was working at CBN, the 700 Club at the time.
Jeez.
The moment that the Supreme Court ruled in favor and legalized gay marriage, the news broke while I was in my CBN cubicle. It was like ding, ding, ding. And all of a sudden I kept hearing like this wailing and gnashing of teeth. We're like, oh, Lord, come quick. Like, the world is ending. And I was like looking around. I was like, what on earth? Are we under attack? Is there like a terrorist attack? And like pulled up CNN. And it was like, the Supreme Court's legalized gay marriage. And in that moment, like, I didn't feel upset. But I also, it was just like a really confusing time, because it was like one of the first moments where I realized I was at odds with the Christians that were around me.
Right.
And they acted like this was the end of the world. But I was hearing that background of that just utter despair. I'm pretty sure someone was crying while watching the live stream from outside, like in the Washington like park in front of the monument. And like, they were just so happy, unadulterated joy. And I could not feel upset. Like, there was even a piece of me that was happy for them. And in my head, I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like, am I going down the slippery slope? But it was just like one of those things where my real life experience went against what I had been taught, because I had been taught if someone is gay, all they have to do is come to Jesus and Jesus will make you straight.
Yep.
And that didn't happen for my brother.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm sure that didn't happen for a lot of people. And I also realized too how much Christian media plays a role in this false idea that you can be quote unquote healed of being gay, because I had pitched in one of our producer meetings having he was a Christian gay celibate man who talked openly about him being gay, but that he was choosing to be celibate, which at the time I was like, this is probably the way to go. I haven't figured it all out yet. But I know, like, I believe that they were born that way. And I don't know why God would make them that way. But regardless, I pitched this and I was like, I think this is real life. I think a lot of people, quote unquote, struggle with this and could be encouraged by the fact that they're not alone and that they're not an abomination, and, that they can still find a place in the church while being themselves. And it got immediately shot down. And I remember being told, like, well, no, that's going to discourage people from being able to get their ultimate healing. And I remember thinking, like, we are deceiving so many people by only telling stories where people, quote unquote, get a miracle or get healed, when that is not the reality. And I'm also coming
Right.
in with the background of like, my dad was not healed. And I think more people don't get an answer to prayer. And I think it takes more faith to still have faith after you don't get a miracle than to be promoting all these stories where these amazing things happen, because that's just not the reality for most people.
Yeah. 100%. It's that clash of the religious dogma that you grew up believing is true versus the reality of how the world actually works at times, right? Whether it's praying for a healing that doesn't happen, or it's someone being gay, whatever it is. It's like you're taught in this. Well, I'm not sure how many people out there listening did not grow up in the world that we grew up in, but it's very difficult to fully communicate how insular that whole world is. Like, they do have answers for everything. They do. It's not like they don't have answers. There's answers for every single question that you could possibly think of. They thought about it. But all roads point back to like this religious dogma that makes you choose between either your own intuition or your own lived experience and what they tell you is the clear, teaching of scripture or the Christian tradition. And that creates a lot of like dissonance inside of you, because you get to a point where either your intuition or your lived experience finally makes you realize or think about how reality might be different than what you were taught it is, or you shut down that part of your brain and just believe the dogma over everything, right? And I think what was tough for me at this stage in the game, and we're going to kind of speed it up here because this is when the first domino falls, but what makes it so difficult for me was that I was taught that truth matters. I was taught that morality matters. I was taught that sexual morality is not postmodern. It's a modern, it's an objective truth about how the world functions. Sex before marriage is sin. And so it was really difficult watching the same Christians who taught me that suddenly create new reasons why whatever Trump did wasn't that bad. Right? Or maybe, it's not great, but hey, in the grand scheme of things, Tim, this guy's on our team. And I'm sitting there just kind of like, but you radicalized me not to give up an inch when it comes to sin, quote unquote. You're the ones who taught me that when the world tells me to move towards them and compromise, to plant my feet firmly in the ground and tell them to move towards me. It was really difficult and jarring to watch this world that I thought was standing on truth actually tell me to move and to kind of compromise the beliefs that they gave me. And that was, it sounds like for you too, April, with what's happening in the background with your own personal life, plus this reality that like, hey, you can grab women and people will still vote for you in the name of Jesus. Like, wait, then what does sexual morality even mean? Like, what are we actually talking about here if these things are way more malleable than I was led to believe? And why was I held to this standard and God couldn't use me if I broke it, but Trump can be used by God to run the country and have our nuclear launch codes, even though he's on his third marriage, he's on the cover of Playboy, and he brags about grabbing women, not to mention everything else. Like, I saw the bullying, I saw the dehumanization, I saw the lies as well. But again, in church world, in the evangelical world, sex is like, it is the focus of it's the standard for purity. I mean, one of the reasons why being gay is wrong, right, in their world is because it's sexual perversion. They just do despicable things. And so we can't tolerate sexual perversion. Well, actually, you can. You actually endorse and openly tolerate actual sexual perversion, like sexual assault. So I'm not sure for you, April, but from there, once that domino fell, then things started unraveling very quickly. Because then we walk into Black Lives Matter, right? And I'm reading books like The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. Then we walk into COVID, and I'm like, wait a second, why are pastors that I know telling me that wearing a mask is tyranny? And I want to be really clear for the audience out there. At this point in my journey, none of this was political. Meaning, I wasn't thinking about this from a Republican Democratic perspective. I was thinking about it from a Jesus perspective. I was thinking about, okay, if the greatest commandment is to love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love my neighbor as myself, why is it tyranny to wear a mask during a global pandemic that is killing people? That seems like a great way to love our neighbor that requires almost nothing of us. Like, really, putting a mask on our face requires so little of us. And yet I have Christians saying, no, this is tyranny, do not comply. Right? Social distancing orders were difficult for sure, but we didn't know how this thing spread, and we had no vaccine yet, and we had very little information, right? And of course, look, I mean, Could anything be done better? Of course, everything could be done better. No one's debating that. But this idea that we're being shut down for our faith, it didn't make sense to me. And here's why. And then I'll give it back over to you. With COVID in particular, don't forget my background that I said earlier, right? I come from this like Frank Viola, small churches are the answer. We have to move from this event-centered mega everything to this community-centered structure because I have that in the background. I have that experience at 11th hour, living in community with really good people in my life who I'm doing life with. So when COVID happened, I'm thinking, wait a second, guys, we all know that church is not somewhere you go. Paul, in the Bible, you don't go to church. You are the church, right? And so I'm thinking to myself, this could be a great way for the church to actually go back to its roots and to be in little embodied communities, following all social distancing orders, of course, but to love oneself and one's neighbor in small little micro groups away from this mega church everything. So to me, it didn't seem at all that controversial. My thought was never the state's shutting down the church. How could you? You can't shut down you can't shut down the gathering of believers where two or more are gathered, right? You could easily, in New Jersey, a very liberal state, I think the most severe it got was they wanted you not to have more than like 2 non-family members in your house at any given time to kind of slow the spread. Great. So call up 2 of your neighbors who go to your local church and meet on Sunday mornings and have a little get together, be connected again. There was such an opportunity for that to happen. Yeah. But instead I saw pastors I knew, this is a pandemic. We're being shut down. This is tyranny. And I'm like, guys, again, I'm thinking quote unquote biblically here. There are ways to do this really well. Instead, we watched everyone shift to this online church model, which I thought was just so unnecessary and so annoying. So those 3 things, I call them kind of the unholy trinity, right? You have Black Lives Matter, you have Trump, and you have COVID, all happening at one time. That for me, everything is unraveling. I'm like, wait a second. I don't think I was on the right side of many of these issues. And it was actually Sean Foyt, the worship leader, the Faith Over Fear guy. He was the guy. I got so frustrated seeing his stuff during a global pandemic. He was the guy that gave me the thought, maybe we need a new evangelical movement. That's when I first thought of the name, the New Evangelicals. It was October of 2020. I was on my front porch watching Sean do his "we're being persecuted" bit, and I said, I'm so tired of this. I'm a worship drummer. I'm still in the church. I'm tired of this. We need a new evangelical movement or something. And that's when I thought of the name, the New Evangelicals.
Yeah, very similar for me as well. COVID and Black Lives Matter were big pieces in my wake-up call. But also, I think how quickly I was demonized because I didn't vote for Trump in 2016. Yes. And I didn't even vote for Hillary because I hadn't fully
Same.
In my head, it was still a demon rat. Like you couldn't vote because of abortion. Like
I voted third party.
Yeah, I also voted third party in 2016, but I could not bring myself to vote for Donald Trump because of everything that you just said. And the amount of people from my dad's church and from his ministry life that, I mean, I got personal messages saying my late father would be disappointed in me for not voting for Donald Trump, that I was thwarting the will of God and going against what God wanted, that I would be judged for not voting for Trump, that he was God's chosen. And then in the same breath, they're literally demonizing me, where voting for Trump almost became a sacred act. And if you didn't vote for him, it was sinful. Right. And I just like you, I just remember being like, Donald Trump just a few months ago said he's never asked God for forgiveness. We all heard that Hollywood tape. I think at a minimum, he should have asked God for forgiveness for that. Yep. And they were just like, oh, no. And so that was just a big wake-up call of how quickly, despite my lifelong work in the church and in ministry, and literally I went to Christian colleges. I went to Pat Robertson's Regent University to get my master's. I was working at the 700 Club before we moved to Tennessee. My entire life was to spread the gospel. I was in it. And suddenly I was being demonized because I didn't vote for the most anti-Christ candidate I've ever seen in my entire life.
What?
It was just kind of like, okay.
Excuse me?
And so then the next few years, it was before TikTok. I didn't get TikTok until 2020 when I started really speaking out loud, when I figured some more things out. But I just remember I went a little more introspective, and I knew they were wrong. about Trump. Like I knew, like I just knew in my spirit, like I really believe that the Holy Spirit was leading me to make these decisions. Like I did not feel a peace about voting for Trump. And I did not, like, I just felt at peace about even accepting gay people and becoming queer affirming. Like it was all spirit led. And I was constantly demonized for that by the people in my own church who screamed about doing life together and we're all a community and come as you are. Oh, but not if you're going to be a Christian and not support Trump.
That's right.
Then we're going to have a problem.
That's right.
So I just finally asked myself, okay, if I know they're wrong about Trump, what else have they taught me that they're also wrong on?
Yep.
And though that literally just pulled the string. And so I literally went like theological point by theological point, and I went hardcore deconstructing, especially during the pandemic because we were all home, and what else did I have to do but completely have an existential crisis about everything I believed.
Yep.
And so I just dug in deep. I was like, okay, what is abortion really? When do abortion rates go down? Do bans help? Like I went through all of the things, all the talking points that I used to scream about, that I knew. And suddenly I was like, oh, okay, I was wrong. I was wrong about a lot of stuff.
Yes, exactly. I want to kind of do our final segment here and talk about kind of going from, is anyone else out there like me to discovering this whole world of deconstruction? So let's do this. Let's take one more break, a short break. We'll come back in a few minutes. We'll kind of talk about what led me to starting TNE, what led you to start your channel, and then what led us to kind of come together and start this work. And then we'll go from there. Friends, welcome to the Tim and April Show. If you're just joining, make sure to give this video a like and to sub to the channel. We'll be back in about 4.5 minutes. See you in a sec. The Tim and April Show is a part of the New Evangelicals Network. Is it just me, or do you ever feel like the version of Christianity you were handed just isn't it? Yeah, me too. And that's why I started the New Evangelicals. We're a nonprofit, digital-first organization dedicated to helping people deconstruct toxic theology and helping you embrace a faith rooted in love, justice, and of course, inclusivity. We talk about the hard stuff, Christian nationalism, purity culture, church trauma, and the Bible, without the gaslighting, fear-mongering, and other baggage that we know comes along with it. We build real community, challenge harmful narratives, and remind people that following Jesus was never about power or control. It was about love, justice, and liberation. So if you've got questions, if you're feeling alone in your faith journey, or if you just need a place where it's safe to ask, what the happened to American Christianity, we're here for you. You can follow the New Evangelicals on podcast, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram to be part of the movement, because faith should be about loving your neighbor, not legislating your theology.
Hey y'all, it's April LaJoy here. When I talk about Christian nationalism, I am unfortunately speaking from firsthand experience because I used to be a Christian nationalist. In fact, I sang my own original Christian nationalist song on The Jim Bakker Show.
America say Jesus, He makes the nation free. Jesus, yeah, never be.
That's enough of that. But if you want to hear more about my story, where I talk about what it's like to be a Christian nationalist and peel back the curtain of what that mindset feels like, you can read all about it in my book, Star Spangled Jesus, Leaving Christian Nationalism and Finding a True Faith. I also talk about the different tenets and tactics and the frontline issues of Christian nationalism that keep people inside. So it's available wherever books are sold. It's also available in ebook and audiobook versions, and I narrate it.
Hey friends, I know how worried you are about how empowered Christian nationalism got in this past election and how it's being used to distort faith and threaten democracy. The good news is that people are mobilizing to resist, which is why I'll be at the Summit for Religious Freedom happening April 5th through the 7th in Washington, D.C. Christian nationalism is not just a political issue. It's a direct challenge to religious freedom for everyone. That's why it's so important that we come together, learn from experts, and organize for real change. At this summit, you'll hear from powerful speakers, connect with like-minded advocates, and be a part of a movement to push back against the misuse of religion in politics. And also, I'll be there. And because you're watching a New Evangelicals production, you get 10% off of your ticket with the code TNE25 at checkout. This fight is too big to take on alone. Join me in Washington, D.C. April 5th through 7th and use code TNE25 for 10% off. Let's do this together. Link in the description. I know how lonely this journey can feel when you're questioning, deconstructing, or just trying to find a faith that actually looks like Jesus. That's why I'm proud to announce TNE Connect is coming in March. This brand new app from the New Evangelicals is designed to help you find community, connect with like-minded people, and access exclusive resources, all paywall free, of course. With TNE Connect, you can join local and online groups, dive into deep conversations, and get resources that help you find a better path forward in your faith without an algorithm deciding what you see and don't see. No gatekeeping, no pay to play, just a space for you to belong. So whether you're looking for community, support, or just a place where asking hard questions is normal, this is for you. TNE Connect is launching in March. If you want to be the first to know when it's available, hit the link in the description to get notified. All right, we're back, friends. Welcome in. Make sure to give this video a like. We are wrapping up the last section of kind of how we went from point A, growing up in conservative Christian fundamentalism, to point B. So April, essentially for me, right, we got to the point where Trump happens, Black Lives Matter happens, COVID happens, and I say to myself, we need a new evangelical something. Now, for me, I was quite terrified of even thinking about that because I was a no-name volunteer at a random church in South Jersey. I had no connections. I'm not a pastor. I have no credentials. But essentially, no one had the name the New Evangelicals. Like no one had it. I thought, well, this is a good name. I kind of like it. Let me just grab it for a rainy day. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. I mean, at the time I was project managing, I had a lot of questions. I was kind of waking up to the reality that something is wrong in my church tradition, but I didn't know if anyone out there was thinking about this. I had no clue if there was like others asking the same questions I was asking, minus some people here and there. Eventually, a friend of mine said, look, dude, just start the Instagram account. Like just convert your drumming account, because I was a drummer, convert that account to TNE, the New Evangelicals, and just see what happens. Like if it fails, it fails. Now, I was terrified because I am a type 6 on the Enneagram. So the idea of being mocked or people laughing at me or trying something audacious only to have it fail is like crippling. But yeah, December 1st, 2020, I made a video in my upstairs attic and I said, hey, this is the New Evangelicals. It was just an Instagram account. There was nothing else. And there was certainly no long-term vision of what it's become now with 2 shows and everything else. But I just had to know, like, am I the only person out there? And so I just started asking questions on Instagram stories. I would ask a question about tithing or the church or whatever it was. And people would give me their answers. I would screenshot them anonymously and then share them back in the stories, and just started kind of growing from there. And then the account, over time, it really grew and it kind of blew up. And 2 things happened that really set me on this path, I think, long term. The first was January 6th. So December 2020, I start TNE. January 6th, 2021, a bunch of people with flags and Bibles and other kinds of Christian iconography storm our Capitol building. And I'm watching this live on my computer, and my jaw is just dropped. And it's over and over again. I'm like, wow, I'm watching history here. I can't believe this is happening, right? We're watching windows being broken. We're watching an angry, violent mob do this. And then I see something I will never forget. I see a Christian flag, the same exact Christian flag I pledged allegiance to in my Awana classes back in the day, and that I pledged allegiance to at my vacation Bible schools and my youth group, right? That same Christian flag is being paraded around the Senate chambers as a sign of conquest. And then I see a prayer to Jesus, thanking him for this opportunity to do what they did. And my jaw just went through the floor. I was so awestruck, asking myself, how did the faith that raised me lead to this? Why am I seeing worship songs that I sang in church being sung on the Capitol grounds as this is happening? Why am I hearing a prayer to Jesus, the same one that I gave my radical allegiance to? Why am I seeing this being said after, for the first time, I think in American history, the peaceful transfer of power was stopped by a violent mob? And I also knew in the back of my mind that if this was a bunch of Muslim people, right? I knew
Yeah.
how they would talk about it. This is a holy war. This is Sharia law. The radical Islamists are coming for America. I knew how talk radio would talk about this. But because it was Bibles and Christian flags and Christian songs, it was not a big deal. It wasn't a big deal. It's not what you saw. So that was the first moment that really made me go, okay, this Christian nationalist thing, I got to get the inside scoop, because obviously I missed it. Whatever I was a part of, if it was in these circles I was swimming in, I didn't have the eyes to see whatever it is that led to this. And then the second piece that really set me on this path was in April of 2021, my church of 6 years gave me the ultimatum to either stop serving as a drummer with them as a volunteer, or to stop doing what I was doing online. Now, I wasn't full-time. There was no nonprofit. We weren't fundraising. There was no structure, nothing. It was just me behind an Instagram account asking questions. But because I was asking questions about queer inclusivity, or if tithing was biblical or not, that was a bridge too far for my church. And they gave me that ultimatum. They said, you either have to stop doing what you're doing online, or you have to stop doing what you're doing with us as a drummer. And I shook that pastor's hand on the spot after 6 years, after being an all-in volunteer, spending hundreds of hours for free because I wanted to. And I said, I resign. And I walked out and never went back to that church. And it was painful. I mean, it cost me my entire community of people that I was doing life with, so to speak, and that I really believed in. There's a whole history there that maybe I'll unpack a different time. But that was really painful, because I felt, or I believed, that because we held the same beliefs about Christianity, that we could make room for each other, and also we would have the same values. But I realized that you can have the same beliefs and have very different values. And it was a jarring moment. But that moment for me was, I think something happened where I said, I don't know what I just started. I don't know what's going to happen with TNE. I don't know where we're going. But there's something here that I have to explore and kind of let the community develop along with me. And it's too important to stop doing. And I'm going to keep going. And that was, almost 3 years ago now. And so to be where we're at now, being on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, and being able to bring you on as a co-host for this show. Now we have 2 different shows, right? The New Evangelicals podcast, the Tim and April show. To be one of the major players in the progressive Christian thing we're trying to think about is just it's been completely humbling, and it's been an amazing journey, because once I left that church, I was given the permission structure to start not only asking different questions, but to start coming to different answers, as I was able to interview biblical scholars and theologians that were outside of my tradition. And that's how I got here. And then you and I met through this work. I discovered you on TikTok years ago, and we always kept in touch, and we got, pretty friendly over time. And we started the TNE recap a year ago, and now we're here. That's the story.
Yeah, the insurrection was, I had already I was pretty fully deconstructed by the time the insurrection happened, thanks to COVID and being stuck at home and TikTok. But the insurrection, when I saw those Jesus flags out there, and Beecher and I, my spouse, recognized not one, but 2 people that were infamously arrested for the insurrection. And we knew both of them from church. That was when I realized, I had been a Christian nationalist. I was one of them. Because before that, I had kind of distanced myself. I was like, well, I've just always followed Jesus. And that's why I'm here now, because Trump was really what led people astray. But then that was my epiphany moment where I realized, oh no, I was also a Christian nationalist before too. It just wasn't as obvious, because, the Republican candidates back then weren't as obviously immoral as Donald Trump. But anyway, I have to say this, because and I know we're running out of time, so I'll say this very shortly. But that was one thing that was also happening simultaneously through this entire thing, from when I got married back in 2014 to, present. But my spouse, Beecher, had gender dysphoria. which we obviously didn't know what that was at the time. Like
Yeah.
I barely even really understood trans people, because my war when I was growing up in Christian nationalism was focused more on homosexuality and gay marriage. The trans issue, I feel like, has kind of taken that. Although I don't know if you saw, but a Republican recently said that it's not going to be if, but when they overturn gay
Oh,
marriage.
of course. I'm not surprised. We've been talking about this
Right.
for years now, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's on
So
the
my
chopping
spouse,
block.
yeah. So my spouse teacher, I have literally walked with them from them figuring themselves out, which they had gender dysphoria since they were in the 5th grade, had no idea what it was, also grew up in the church. And through our whole marriage, we try. I have tried casting the demons out, because I didn't know. I was like, I don't know why you want to wear my clothes sometimes. And Beecher didn't know either. Like, maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's a demon. Maybe it's I don't know, a kink. Like we really, like, we had no idea. And we tried every avenue that the church told us, like prayed, we fasted, memorized scripture. Like at one point, Beecher's room just had like hundreds of Bible verses all over their walls that they were just repeating over and over again to try to quote unquote fix themselves. But in 2020, so they were also forced home to kind of recognize themselves. And so they came out to me that fall as non-binary, and then came out publicly like a couple years later. But that was also like, I saw firsthand with my spouse how low they got when they couldn't be themselves.
Yeah.
And I realized, okay, this is a life or death situation. Like Beecher did not want to live having to play the perfect Christian husband man role, because it felt so foreign, and it wasn't them. They were being forced to not be who God made them to be. So that was like also just playing in the background more privately, because anytime we would talk to someone at church about it, it was like, oh, that's definitely a demon. And we're like, no, I tried casting it out as the token Pentecostal, and no demons came out.
I tried very hard.
Yeah. And then January 6th. And then honestly, just like everything you mentioned, honestly, to this day, it still is flabbergasting to me that, and we talk about it every single week. I feel like it's like, is there a line? How many lines does this man have to cross before we realize he is not of God? Like, honestly, even if you're not a Christian, he's just not a good person. He's a misogynist. He's racist. He's xenophobic. He's a narcissist. He's clearly in it for himself. He doesn't care about the people who voted for him. He likes that they voted for him and that they gave him power. He's not doing anything to help them. How many of his cuts have hurt Trump supporting farmers or Trump supporting veterans? Like, anyway.
I think that's been the most shocking thing for me 4 years later, or however many, 3 years. It's been such a jump from where we started, even when the insurrection happened, to now. Like, seeing how far this whole evangelical thing has gone and how much they've tolerated, right? This is the same party or a group of people that tell you being tolerant isn't always a good thing. They're the most tolerant people I've ever seen in modern American history of like authoritarianism, of propaganda, of Nazi salutes, of sexual assault. I mean that literally. Not only do they embrace a man who was found liable of sexual assault, right? But they embrace a world of politicians and of leaders who are themselves abusers. Matt Gaetz, that guy is seen as a hero. And even in the theological spaces, right? We both know the story of John MacArthur protecting two different men who molested their own children while they were on his staff. And people still talk about John MacArthur like he's like the second best thing since Christ himself. It is unreal to watch over and over how every accusation is actually a confession. And I think
it goes back to, which we talked about to tie this in, purity culture. And the way this ideology views sex, and especially views women and children as almost like what good Christian husbands own.
Right.
Like women are sexual objects. So they can look past Donald Trump assaulting people or Pete Hegseth assaulting people, even if, the allegations, whatever, because I was always taught, well, boys will be boys.
Right.
You know, can you really
Right.
blame them? They
Right.
can't help what they have between their legs, and really the woman shouldn't have been in that position in the first place. Like
That's right.
it like that is taught in the church. I grew up believing that too. And so like even though I don't understand, because being on this side of it now, it's like, like what? How can you guys do this? But then on the other hand, I'm like, oh, well, the theology gives room to elevate people that assault women because women are viewed
Yeah.
as less than.
That's exactly right. And, I think the last thing I'll say about this, and we can probably we can wrap the show up because we always say just an hour and we're almost 2 hours in, right? But it is truly, I mean, we just, we have to say it like over and over again, right? Like these folks are not consistent with what they claim to believe. The Bible has so many passages about how we love the immigrant, how we welcome the stranger, and they cheer when we deport the immigrant, right? They cheer when the White House releases an ASMR video of them chaining up human beings made in the image of God and sending them off to God knows where. And it is very difficult to take a faith group seriously that claims to care about truth and integrity and family values, right? And loving one's neighbor, and have it expressed in a way that is so clearly the opposite. And then when you point it out, they don't actually know how to respond. So they just deflect. Well, you're just woke. Well, you're just a liberal. Well, Joe Biden. It's like, well, yeah, that's what you do when you can't actually answer,
Right.
or you
Or
can't
you murder
look at,
babies.
right? Yeah.
That's the one a lot, yeah.
When you're too prideful to call out your own cognitive dissonance, you deflect. And I think it's important for people to know, especially we're doing this, friends, to give you all the primer to why we're doing this show. Okay, the whole reason we have this story, we're going to save it to podcast and YouTube, is so people can look back and understand why we do what we do. Because for April and I, and a lot of people who deconstruct, they leave Christianity altogether, and that's totally fine. That's not a judgment thing. It's just a fact thing, right? And I get why they do that. But for April and I, and for many others, we left evangelicalism because of our radical allegiance to the way of Jesus. We didn't find it congruent with what we were taught, and also what we read about in the Bible, or what we hear about in the Christian tradition beyond the basement of fundamentalism. And it turns out there's a whole house. There's a house full of rooms of different ways of being Christian. And so April and I think we say this kind of tongue in cheek, but in a way, we kind of see this as like our repentance, because we were part of that world helping to make the sausage, inadvertently or not. And now we feel an obligation as Christians to expose the Christian nationalism that is animating a Trump regime, because a lot of people who didn't grow up this way don't understand how militant, how zealous, how extreme some of the people are in these spaces that really, and I mean this not hyperbolically, want to take over the country and rule from the top down and replace our Constitution with some deranged view of biblical law where women are stoned for being caught in adultery and gay people are in prison. That's not fake. There are Christians out there today who are close to power, by the way, who want to repeal the 19th Amendment, who want to overturn Obergefell. And we really feel like as Christians, as two Christians, we have an obligation to stand up twice a week live on Mondays and Thursdays, and then wherever it lands after that, to say absolutely freaking not. We're going to call this bullshit out, and we're going to resist these people every freaking step of the way, because guess what, white evangelicals? You radicalized us to be this way. You did this. You want to know who created Tim and April? The white evangelical Christian nationalism that you see is taking over our country. That's what radicalized us. And now we're going to fight back.
Yeah, I was told I should love my neighbor and love my enemy. And now that I'm trying to do that, they're like, okay, socialist.
Yeah, right.
So,
I want affordable health care because Jesus says heal the sick. All right, you commie. Like, wait, what?
yeah.
Like,
okay, Marxist.
Yeah, right.
Trained Marxist.
I mean, Jesus said liberate the oppressed. Like, I guess call him a Marxist. I don't know. Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. No, I totally view this as my repentance too, because I was as loud as I was for the majority of my life on the conservative, Republican, Christian nationalist side. And I realized I was wrong and contributed to the machine that we see today that is a very dangerous threat to both democracy, but also the Christian faith. It is not college professors pushing people away from Christianity more than what Christians are doing right now, what evangelicals
That's right.
are doing right now, are creating more atheists than anything. And to be clear, I know we have a lot of atheists that are here, and I love you, and I am
We
never
love
going to
them.
try to convert you. I have no desire to do that whatsoever. But yeah, I'm like, I just have to be just as loud now on the other side, and maybe one day I'll look back and say, you know what, I was wrong on that, and that's fine. I always want to be open
Totally.
to being wrong, but right now, I know Christian nationalism is wrong. I know that it does not follow the teachings of Jesus. And as someone who has followed Jesus pretty much my entire life, it really pisses me off that they're dragging Jesus's name through the mud while they're storming the Capitol with a noose. So,
No.
yeah.
So, friends, how can you help? This is a brand new show, or this is our second episode. It's a brand new channel. I will just tell you, and April will attest, as a content creator, it is a lot of work to grow anything online. It just takes time and energy. The way you can help us, and this is real, is by liking this stream, subscribing to the show, and if you feel compelled, please share this content. I would love if you liked what we had to say, sharing this episode. It also lives on podcasts as well. You can find it there on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Sharing the show with other people is really an easy, effective, costs you nothing way to get this out to more people. I will tell you, and I know April is with me, the next 4 years, you need more voices like April and I's and many others who grew up this way to help expose what's actually going on here. And we're going to be doing that. We're doing that Mondays and Thursdays live at noon. We're here all the way with you. We are not going anywhere. Your support means the absolute world. And we thank you for sitting in on this live and listening to our stories. Hopefully it kind of fleshes out. Yeah, hopefully it kind of fleshes out, though, what got us here. Okay, we are completely committed to Jesus, and that's exactly why we resist Christian nationalism, right? That's exactly why. So anything else, April, before we sign off, land this plane?
Fight fascism. Woo!
Yeah, woo! All right, friends, talk to you later.